Hello and welcome to the 14th episode of the Wagner Students for Criminal Justice Reform podcast. I am your host, Thurston Powers, and with me today is our returning guest, Tyler Prochazka, feature editor at the Basic Income Earth Network. Hello, Tyler. Thank you for joining us.
Hey Thurston, how are you doing?
Doing good. So the last time we spoke, generally about the basic income, what it is, how it works, and where it's been tried before. Today I'd like to talk about some of the criticisms, starting with the assumption of altruism. Last time we sort of talked about the ability for people to form services and charities and when they have more personal income or
Right.
UBI. Uh, what guarantee can you offer those concerned on the left that there won't be some social worker there to teach, for example, like a new mother how to prepare formula and feed their child?
So you mean in the sense of if you have a basic income, are you still going to have this type of bureaucratic state that arises with the basic income?
More that if you replace the welfare state, which provides services like WIC, for example, like social
Sure.
workers who train mothers, new mothers, or provide them with milk or whatever, um, that simply giving a mother the cash equivalent of that social worker and the formula, that the mother will be unable to take care of herself and her child with that money.
Well, I think that there's sort of a complementary status between uh, those that support charity and services that are targeted towards people, and also creating a universal guarantee that you're not going to fall behind a specific um, threshold with regard to income. So I am almost certain that in a place like the United States, that mothers would be taken care of in a world where we have the basic income. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that if we eliminated a government targeted program to help, single mothers or mothers in poverty, the that free individuals and charities would not step up, which already exist, by the way, to help single mothers, would step up to try to help women that that need targeted assistance. I think that the the comparative advantage of the government is creating a uh, it's creating universal programs. That's usually where it acts best, in programs that it doesn't exclude people from, because that's really what the government is there to do. It's there to provide a public good, and I would say that the basic income would be such a public good, and um, at the same time, I think where private charity has its comparative advantage is targeting specific populations. So I'm very skeptical of those that criticize the right, that support basic income, that say, oh, well, then where are we going to get our services, our targeted services? I think that for the most part, and I'm not going to speak too generally because the bureaucratic state is so vast that there's no way for me to know all of the programs that exist. But in general, I think that most of those things are probably already being done in the volunteer sphere. And if not, I highly doubt that single mothers are going to be the ones to be left behind if we cut a program like WIC.
I think that it's also possible that if you provide volunteers with a basic income, or if you were to provide you know, people with a basic income who are interested in helping single mothers, they
Mhm.
would be able to provide that labor more readily if they did not have to,
Right.
if it did not basically cost them their livelihood in order to go help these women.
So, in Finland, what they're doing is they're experimenting with several types of um, basic income derivatives. You have one group that is going to just straight up receive the basic income, another group who will get a bonus if they engage in charity, and another group who will lose a bonus if they don't engage in volunteering. So I'm going to watch the results of how those different groups compare to see how it changes behavior, because I'm still not sure if that is the right answer. I think that creates a lot of questions that the government would have to resolve about what counts as volunteering, what counts as a charity that we're going to recognize. What if I create my own charity? Uh, and so I think that it could create some bad incentives for the government to have to then start recognizing what is and is not a charity or volunteer service that they would recognize. So I was initially sort of supportive of the idea of tying the basic income, or at least a portion of it, to volunteering, but that's sort of then you sort of start to eliminate the whole reason why basic income, I think, is such a preferable policy option, in that it doesn't require such a bureaucracy and it doesn't create those distortions where the government has to step in. So um, I am more of the mind that perhaps uh, charities should start to think about how they can use a basic income type model to encourage people to also get involved in volunteer service. I would prefer uh, if you're going to target it to encourage volunteering, I would prefer if a private charity would do so. For instance, I mean, the Koch Fellows program, they give a lot of money for people to go engage in think tanks. And I think somebody like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates could create a similar type program where for the entire summer you go and engage in some charity of a list that they choose, or you can apply for your own type of charity. I think that can certainly exist in the private sphere, and I think it would probably do a better job.
Hmm, I agree. So, one of the things that Charles Murray talks about in his proposal for a UBI is sort of that the ability to have a floor opens up the possibility for new forms of social organization that may meet these needs better than the current welfare state.
Right.
Like if you've got a whole bunch of people who are uh, essentially have this basic income and are interested in doing volunteering, they now can, and
Right.
they also might be able to give more, um,
Right.
because like a lot of people are treading water. A lot of people who would be willing to give to their churches
Right.
or their community or someone that they know who needs help. Um, but there just isn't that cushion um, on which that they can sort of just like you know um, rely on. Uh,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Well, I think so. I think that it's important to realize that the poor give a larger percentage of their income already to charity than the wealthiest. which I mean, an absolute number, I'm sure that the wealthiest give a lot more, but nonetheless, there is a spirit of charity among those that don't have very much, and I think that this demonstrates how we don't need, at least in American culture, we don't need the government to come in and force people to engage in charity, especially the poor. They are going to be the ones that are most interested in targeting individual populations that need assistance beyond the basic income. I think Murray is completely correct that the types of social organizations that we can't even imagine now would arise in a world where you have guaranteed income, and you could see these groups of people trying to reorient their environment and their society in a way that's positive, their communities. um, I think that that spirit already exists in these people, and you're absolutely right. If we give them an opportunity where they have this guarantee, I think that it would radically change their behavior, and it would make them think about, okay, what is the way that I can contribute to society in the most effective manner. Um, and I think that we would see a lot of really interesting uh, new types of social organizations. I think that that's absolutely correct.
Now, I know that there's an attempt to implement sort of a basic income in Africa. There's a couple in Southeast Asia, yeah.
That's correct.
And China has tried it a few times, if I recall. Um, was there anything documented in terms of like a change in the way that communities address their problems? Like, was there greater connectivity within communities? Was that something that was measured or looked at?
So actually, that's a really good question. What we've seen so far is, or what I've seen so far of the research is that um, that is not a question that has been addressed yet. The Give Directly that's doing the trials in Africa, their point is to make it actually universal, because previously you would select individuals from within the community, and they would get the basic income because it's really expensive. But in Africa, since the cost of living, relatively speaking, is very, very low by Western standards, so they can actually take thousands of people in several villages and create a true universal basic income. And one of their specific areas that they're measuring is social cohesion. How does a society change when everybody has this guaranteed floor? How does that change your social interactions with people? And that is a really important question. What we've seen in trials like India and elsewhere is that there was more connectivity, in the sense that people were branching out. They were sending their children, they were more likely to send their children to school more often. And so you would see those connections created there. You saw people that were going and starting more businesses. So that was creating new connections and new types of opportunities there. So when it comes to social cohesion, though, I think our best data is going to come from a truly universal implementation of the basic income, because I think I'm fairly certain that social cohesion would be much improved in a situation where uh, nobody is left behind, in a sense. Nobody has that envy or anger at somebody else at the same time because they don't have any money, or they're not getting money from the government, or perhaps they think that people shouldn't get this money from the government. Since everybody's enjoying it, that stigma would go away. So my guess is that social cohesion would improve, but I'm fairly um, chained to the empirical data, so I will, hedge a little bit, and we'll see what the actual results are from Give Directly.
Yeah. So the other end of the spectrum, there's the issue of democracy and the majority always voting for more. So
Right.
the Foundation for Economic Education and, of course, historically Mises has argued that once you allow people to have a universal basic income, they will have one law that they can easily lobby for and concentrate their interest and turn up the redistribution of wealth to such a point that it would cause the society to collapse. What
So,
ways? Oh, sorry, continue. Yeah.
so there's several elements to that, and we sort of have to face the reality with regards to it. So the first is that that's happening, and that's going to continue to happen. So right now we face 120 some $1 trillion in entitlements, and a lot of that in unfunded liabilities rather for entitlements, and a lot of that money just goes towards investigating people, towards implementation, towards telling people how they need to live their lives, and then you have a lot of activity and economic activity that's derived from just talking about how to reform those programs, lobbying for reform of those programs, people that are spending time applying for those programs, jumping through the hoops, the people that are evaluating whether or not you can get that type of money. So all that is happening right now, and it's going to continue to happen no matter what. We have to face up to the fact that some sort of welfare state is going to exist in the United States and in Europe. That culture is already there, and we already have a lot of people already have the inclination to support a welfare state of some sort. The question is, would the amount of money that we spend and the amount of time and economic activity be more if we have a basic income rather than a world that we don't? And the answer is no. You have one program where it is highly efficient, like where you have no conditions and you're just doling out money. If we were to establish a program like that, the amount of time that we would have to spend on it in every sector, both in civic society where people are talking about how to reform the government, and in individual society where people are applying to the program, that would eliminate thousands, untold amounts of hours from that section of society. Because then you're just talking about, okay, so how much more money, how much money should we increase the basic income? What sort of uh, uh, conditions should we tie the increase in the basic income to? That would certainly be a discussion, but there would not be these dozens and dozens of different programs that are everybody is trying to evaluate and trying to get their 2 cents from, and then not just on the civic level, but then on the bureaucratic level, there would be thousands and thousands of hours, uh, perhaps millions of hours collectively that can be spent on other things because we no longer have the government evaluating all of these dozens of different redundant uh, um, programs. So then that could be dedicated to something more productive instead of having these bureaucrats running around. Um, Now, if people got too much money, would that be a bad thing for the economy? Yes, I think that you have to base your basic income off of economic realities. In the future, I think that with automation, we can take substantial amounts of time off from work, a lot more so than we can today without disrupting economic activity. But let's also be clear that there is a right wing in the United States, and it is unlikely that we will have a basic income that is anything more than basic. We haven't raised the federal minimum wage since the Bush administration. So if that's, and I mean that's a pretty popular policy, is raising the minimum wage. People don't understand the effects of the minimum wage. And I think basic income is not nearly as disruptive as the minimum wage. I would much prefer if we raised a basic income to the minimum wage, because you're not imposing a direct cost of employment on employers. So um, I would much rather have people focusing on how much can we increase the basic income politically, rather than how much can we increase the minimum wage. But at the same time, I do think that you would have two sides to this debate, and I think that Mises and others are wrong to think that people wouldn't push back towards a basic income that's too large. I would push back towards a basic income that's too large, and I'm part of the basic income movement. So I think that the net effect of replacing basic income with most of these entitlement programs and most of these targeted means tested programs would be to free up thousands, perhaps millions of hours of of uh, of activity that's now dedicated just towards shuffling around papers and deciding how people live their lives. So we need to face that reality, that we have limited choices in what is politically feasible, and that goes for the leftists and the rightists, and there's the window for both. So I don't think basic income is going to exceed any type of standard where will lead to economic collapse. I think that that's absurd. I think that if anything, they should be supporting the basic income as a much preferable alternative to what's going to be inevitable otherwise, which is, these $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Let's try to eliminate those and eliminate all the bureaucracy, and perhaps we can have a lot more productive activity instead of shuffling around papers at the the at all these entitlement bureaus.
Hmm. So one thing you mentioned was the minimum wage. So that's, we keep hearing, new pushes across the country for it. And yet I don't hear people pushing for basic income. And oddly enough, I hear about these basic income experiments in countries that are far less wealthy, far less capable of supporting a basic income than I imagine that some of these Western countries would be able to. So why is it that it's more politically feasible in countries where they do not have the sort of first world economy that one would typically associate with supporting a basic income, and yet they're doing it? Well, how is that politically feasible there?
So, so for instance, I think in India, where it's actually being taken pretty seriously in the political class. Um, in India, for instance, they recognize that they have an absolute mess with regards to implementing targeted programs. There's a lot of exclusion and inclusion errors, just like what we see in China with their minimum income guarantee. Uh, so the reason I think it's politically feasible is because they're recognizing reality that it's it's very ineffective for the government to attempt to have targeted programs. There's too high of a risk of not only um, not just actually eliminating the problem that you're targeting, but at the same time, people are going to lobby the government to get some sort of benefit from this type of program. Because it's so complicated, it's a lot easier to hide corrupt activity, corrupt usage of the program, and they and so they're turning towards something as a universal basic income as an alternative because it is for the government. It is really inexpensive, and it is does not have that high potential for um, uh, errors of inclusion where you have people taking advantage of the system because everybody's is already getting the benefit. So I think that in those countries, perhaps they are farther ahead of us in recognizing that the welfare state is not going to work in a place like India with more than 1 billion people, and they're also further behind in sort of in the development of their welfare state. I would say those places um, that are uh, uh, poorer than the United States. I think that there is um, less of an idea of what welfare means. They don't have this myth surrounding uh, government social guarantees that the United States and perhaps a lot of Europe has, that it has to be targeted, it has to be means tested. Uh, so I think perhaps because the myths aren't as strong, or their conceptions aren't quite as set in stone, since they haven't had the long history that the United States and Europe has of developing welfare over the past 1 or 2 centuries. Um, so I think it's easier for them to reconceptualize. They're thinking about this in a scientific way rather than in a way that's grounded in some
Is more
tired
keen.
conception, right?
Interesting. The point about sort of high cost rent seekers in a society that cannot support them is fascinating, though. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what you're saying is that the corruption problem in many newly industrialized countries is contributing to them realizing that a welfare state is not viable.
Right.
Fascinating. Um, if only we, if so, I guess what we should be hoping for is a more corrupt U.S. government. So
Well,
who knows?
yeah, I think that it's not the problem, that problem does not exist to the extent in the United States, because we have a very strong rule of law, um, and we do pay a lot of bureaucrats to monitor fraud and abuse. The fraud and abuse certainly takes place in the United States. Don't get me wrong, but we're talking about, I think, a much smaller percentage, although it is I think we are talking about billions of dollars that are uh, taken from the United States inappropriately. But I think it's a much smaller percentage that leaks from these programs to perhaps nefarious actors than in a place like India, the where they don't have that institutional knowledge that the United States has. So I do think that the United States isn't the worst. When it comes to bureaucracy, we do have a lot of institutional knowledge, but there's a limit to what I think the government is capable of achieving as with regards to efficiency. And there's just a limit period with regards to how efficient any type of institution, including a private institution, can be when you talk about means testing or targeting a program. So you have to talk about that opportunity cost when you want to means test it. What does that cost us? When you want to add a condition, what does that cost? And does it actually just make us feel a little better inside that we say, oh, we're forcing them to do charity to get a portion of their basic income? Does that just make us feel better? Or does it actually have a net positive impact on society? So I think that every political ideology needs to look at, perhaps be a little more utilitarian about their views, and that I think some basic income advocates even need to be more utilitarian and look at the empirical data. What I love most about the basic income movement is that most of the people here are pushing for empirical trials. When did we get an empirical trial of any type of social program ever? And before we never did that, for as far as I can tell, for these programs that cost us trillions of dollars. But what we're advocating is let's actually look at the data. Let's look at how people change their behavior, and then we can adjust this program based on what we actually see from the results. So that's why I'm so impressed with this movement, and why I'm part of it, is because for the most part, most people are trying to figure out what is best for society rather than what makes them feel good.
Hmm. Well, with any luck, that's what we will see happen in the near future.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you.
And hopefully we can have you again soon.
Yeah, I love doing it, and I will definitely come back.
All right. Thank you. And to the audience, if you liked what you hear, go ahead and subscribe, like, and follow us on Facebook. Have a good night.
Thanks again, Thursday.